if you have a content agency of any kind, so you do SEO, content, graphics, video, social media, copywriting, these kinds of things, I'm going to show you today how I automated the quality checks for a content agency and some interesting use cases. So we'll go over tagging errors versus what the CEO was doing before, which is making custom Loom videos for training and quality, automatic detection of these quality errors, which is also interesting, especially if you do text, social media, tweets, SEO content of any kind. And then also, once we detected these quality issues, solving upstream problems, also some, change management considerations, and also talk about accountability, which I think is a really interesting use case. Accountability, yeah, sure, okay. So I said that this was a content agency. So this was the situation. I have a consulting agreement with this company, and from time to time, myself and the owner chat about what they're spending the most time on. All right? And I had the perception that I had automated basically this guy's entire job and most of the job of his leadership team, his project managers. And I said, hey, what are you spending time on? He said, well, you've helped us scale so much that now I've had to hire all these new people, and all these new people, I'm having to check their work to make sure their quality is up to standard before I enable them to get more work. So he was spending hours a day. The founder was doing these quality checks himself, checking the content for quality mistakes, and then he would record a Loom video explaining to the writer what mistakes they made. Of course, this is a bunch of custom Loom videos, and so every single Loom video you make, it's not automatic. You have to go and click the button to record it, copy and paste it into an email, type up the email, address it to the right person, and type up the message to them, and so on and so forth. So there are actually a lot of steps involved. Okay? Of course, the writers were all instructed. They all had their training stuff. They'd all been trained on what to do, right? They were just, they were supposed to use Grammarly. They were supposed to go through a checklist. But of course, people forget. They miss things. They get lazy, right? And then there was some quality parameters that were style type things or project requirements that were they're not grammar issues at all. So, for instance, if the customer specified 10 pages and the writer submitted 9 or the writer submitted 15, these were all incorrect. But Grammarly would never flag this as an issue. If you use, incorrect citation style or incorrect formatting, again, this is not a citation or this is not a Grammarly thing. British English versus American English. If somebody had the wrong Grammarly settings or they just turned it off, or there's some stylistic best practices that he had his people follow as well. Now, the interesting thing was that, the more time, of course, the more effort that this takes, the more he was dumbing down his requirements, because he thought, if I tell people to fix all these things, they're going to just not. It's too much effort for me, too much effort for him, and then also they're just not going to do it, right? They're going to be overwhelmed, and so his quality was suffering, but he was also dumbing down the quality because people were making so many mistakes. So there's a lot of stuff going on. One really interesting principle that I think is an interesting use case for automation is automation for accountability. So I'll have another video tracking project status and KPIs and speed. But in terms of quality, I think this is a really interesting thing, right? So he was telling his people, scan with Grammarly. You may have the same thing where you have procedures or you have tools that could scan your content for quality, but you don't know if those tools are actually being used, and automatically detecting quality issues adds a layer of accountability. It helps you make sure that these tools that are great tools are actually being used. So in this case, it was text content. Grammarly is a great tool. So they had some stuff ignored. They had some stuff turned off. Again, this is a really cool use case around accountability. Okay, so again, the problems that this business was facing was that sometimes, the writers would produce a lot of content. It would take Tom, the owner, some time to go through and check everything. And sometimes by the time he got busy, and sometimes by the time he checked a piece of content, it would be very close to the customer deadline, and it would be so tight that there wouldn't be enough time for him to send it back to the writer, because he would have to wait for the writer to check their email and then send it back. And so he actually had to last minute fix a lot of stuff himself. So again, he had to fix it last minute. Sometimes that meant like 2, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Sometimes he even messaged me at like 5 in the morning, work days. And then oftentimes he would have a writer that he hired, and that person's work would start out great, and then slowly they would start to get lazier, and they would start to miss things and start to make quality mistakes. Lazier and lazier and lazier, and they sort of learned that it was okay, they were getting away with it. Nobody was catching these mistakes anyways, and so their integrity got worse and worse and worse. And then occasionally there would be a pissed off client or a refund or something like that. So okay, so here's how we solved it. So the first thing was talking to the owner. He said, "Hey, I'm spending all this time making quality Loom videos, and like hours a day." And so I said, "Well, are there common issues that everybody seems to make, right? Clearly there are." So I said, well, if you just identify the most common issues, make a list of them, maybe there's 10 or 20 or something like that. All we have to do is then you make one standard training video for each issue, right? Then, put that in Airtable with the name of the issue, maybe a description for training, and then a link to the Loom video. Then all you have to do is in Airtable, tag the issue for the project when it's submitted. And then I can make a button for you where you click the button and it generates a draft email to say, hey, hey Dave, we checked your essay, or we checked your project number 12345, and here's the 3 things we found that were wrong with it, with everything nicely formatted. And he would just have to either make a custom Loom video explaining the extra things that maybe weren't standard issues, or just hit send as is. So this process of tagging quality issues and saving yourself time applies to any kind of content, even video, even graphics, even very complicated stuff. So here's kind of what it looks like in Airtable as an implementation. We had another table, one table for projects, one table for quality issues, and so we're matching them up. So the really cool benefits of doing it this way, number one, of course, you save hours per day making Loom videos. But I think even bigger than that is you can track which writers or which of your team members are making certain mistakes or making the most mistakes. So now you have a ranking of who's the best and who's the worst in terms of quality. We also had in our quality table a sense of like how annoying or how critical is this error. Some errors were very small errors, but we still want to track them as errors. And some errors were just huge mistakes, and basically the person should be fired immediately if they ever make the mistake. So we also had not only data now in terms of who is the best writer, but what were the most common errors, which tells you what training or systems or whatever you have to do to eliminate the most important things holding back the business. So here's how it works. The writer would submit a file. We would scan for quality errors, and we would generate the quality report email, and then Airtable would log the quality errors, update, and this is like an ever updating thing, update a historical writer quality score, which we also use for automatically distributing projects, which is a separate video, and then also updates the most common errors list. So we have some data on which errors are the most commonly occurring, so we can eliminate the most important stuff. Okay, so that stuff applies. This applies to literally any business who you have a team that's making stuff for you, social media posts, video, graphics, SEO content, anything where you have a bunch of people producing stuff for you, or even just one person producing stuff for you. Especially, this is, I think, most relevant at volume, right? Lots and lots of tweets or lots of Instagram posts or lots of TikTok videos, right? Things like that, right? So the cool thing about this, of course, is you can use something like this to identify the three errors that are top of mind, that are the most common that you notice. And then over time, you can improve your quality even further and more and more and more and more and more, so that your customers get a better product in the end. It takes you less time, and it also incentivizes, especially if you're doing distribution stuff, it incentivizes your people to perform at the highest level. So, okay, so here's another really interesting thing. This is especially true for people that do any kind of text content. So tweets or Instagram posts, like with the description of Instagram, SEO content, blog content, things like that. Okay, which is automatic detection of errors. So some quality issues need a person to judge, but most of them don't. Okay, so, and this is like even beyond Grammarly stuff. So, for example, the project would have a column for the amount of words that were required, or the formatting style that was required, things like that. So there was the real quality issues we check for are things like, is the actual word count within spec, within tolerance? We check for correct formatting, right? So are the titles correctly capitalized? There's title capitalization rules. There's one of them is like, each paragraph has to have at least X number of sentences. You don't want to have any run-on sentences. No sentence should be longer than X amount. We have style guides around, like, do you put USA with periods between, or just USA with all letters? Like, these kinds of stylistic things. You can define a style sheet for a customer and say, hey, like, our brand guidelines say that this customer's name is always spelled like this, right? Little dinky things like, is there an opening bracket without a closed bracket? We check for that kind of stuff too. And there's some stuff that ChatGPT is actually pretty great at, which is based on this text description of the requirements from the onboarding form, did this output meet this description, right? So that kind of stuff can all, like, yes, your team has access to Grammarly and they can do a word count thing, but did they actually do it properly? Did they actually do it? And what we found is that most writers did, but a lot of them made mistakes. So here's some interesting use cases that may apply to you if you have different kinds of businesses. So for instance, you have a bunch of editors doing short form video. You say, well, you can automatically see if a video is longer or shorter than a minute. Okay. You can make sure the file size or format is correct, right? Was the spelling of the client's name done correctly? Maybe you do an automatic ChatGPT scan and detect like tone or target audience or things like that, right? Again, so as an interesting use case, so for instance, maybe you have a client, they fill in their onboarding form, they win the project. The project spec says you need X pieces of content per week, per month, whatever. You can distribute those pieces of content between many people or just one, right? You can automatically say, you can classify, say, hey, oh, I need 15 tweets that are threads, and 2 of them should have images and whatever else. Classify the the spec for that mini project, and then automatically detect if what was submitted matches the actual spec, and immediately fire it back to the person responsible if they didn't meet the thing. Okay. Maybe you track time when things are submitted as well, again for accountability. There's lots of things that can be detected. that most people have no idea about, but the value is you can be sure that you're not missing something stupid if you have all this stuff automated. What you don't want to have is the client or somebody on your team, like the client manager or something, noticing an hour before the deadline that there's some stupid mistake was made, right? You just don't want a client noticing this kind of stuff, because that's the kind of ridiculous things that they're going to think you're just unprofessional. Okay. And the cool thing as well is this also allows you to have like a cheaper team. So you can have, if you want the person on your team to be perfect, you have to pay a lot of money for them to know and be super, super diligent. Whereas if you have automation that's diligent for you, you could have like a very cheap person do a lot of this work and then automatically detect ridiculous errors and have massive, massive scale with pretty cheap prices as well. Okay. Change management. So here's some things that we noticed that you will probably notice too if you're thinking about doing some kind of automated quality. So your people are used to making mistakes. They're getting away with it right now. I guarantee you, if you have any more than a couple of people that you talk to like all the time, sometimes they're missing a comma. Sometimes if they're doing quotes, they're putting the punctuation outside the quote instead of inside the quote. Sometimes they're misspelling the client's name. They're not including a link in all the places they should include a link. They're not using the correct hashtags, or they're not spacing things out exactly how you want them to. And either you're looking at it, or somebody's looking at it thinking, you know what, this is not worth a whole like HR issue, is whatever. I'll just fix it myself and get it out. This is costing you more than you realize right now. People are getting away with it. So the thing with automation is it's very picky, and it's cold, and it's just like, hey, you did it wrong, right? Yeah, of course you can phrase it differently, but the fact that you're pointing out things that people may have been getting away with and doing so instantly when they submit it is it can be jarring for people. So it'll feel to a lot of people like you've moved the goalpost. Obviously, you're not actually doing that. You're just starting to tell them about things that you ignored before, you just brushed off. So one strategy that you can do, and then what we did is we turned stuff on and we started to make sure that it was detecting properly, but there was some errors that were more critical than others, and we flagged those and made sure that people knew about those. And there were some errors that we actually didn't tell the writer about right away, and kind of slowly made it more and more and more picky. And in doing so, we're not overwhelming people over time. And as we start to tell people like, hey, this is a real error, and they fix it, they're making less errors. And so if we tell them like, hey, we also detected this other error, it's not as overwhelming. So you may want to think about the same kind of thing. This is generally what this is a conversation with a client, right? This is like something that will happen. So phase 3, it's one thing to detect issues, but how do you eliminate them? So we had reports on, here's the most common issues. The writers were being told about things, but what's even better than knowing that there's an issue after it's done is making it redundant and making it fixed before it happens. So there were common issues that were linked to kind of style or project type. So for instance, some stuff was double space or single space, citation style, etc. So for you might have different project types. You might have a tweet thread and a single tweet. You might have maybe one type is like an Instagram post that's intended to be a very direct offer, and that very direct offer better mention like a link in bio. And you might have another type of post that should not mention link in bio, and maybe you don't want it to have any specific call to action because it's not supposed to do that. So you could trust your people and hope that your people don't mess it up. But what we found to be more productive is thinking about, or what I thought would be better, would be to think about how we had the templates. So the writers did have templates, and they were stored locally on each writer's computer. And of course, when they got a project of a certain type, they would go to their hard drive and pick the right template and go. Now, the problems or the limitations of this approach were obviously sometimes people just accidentally chose the wrong template. And of course, any template update required coordination. So this was quite slow. And then also the downside as well is, writers couldn't work from other computers, right? So if they were on holiday or they were at a coffee shop or like their computer got fried and they had to borrow somebody else's or whatever else, they didn't have access to that other template that was on their own hard drive. So this was, the pick of the wrong template. Of course, there's a bit of time component as well, but you probably also have standard project types. So different types of images, maybe you're like a graphic design place, and sometimes, you have people that do logos and Instagram, like ad images, ad creative, and each type has a different resolution. So rather than basically allowing your people to potentially make a mistake, you could just make the templates not just on their local hard drive, but just simply stored centrally. And then when the project is won, you automatically pick the right template based on the project type and send that to the person. So here is how we did it. We stored the project templates in Google Drive. Of course, then you get a link for each template. And then in Airtable, we had a lookup table of, okay, this is the project type, this is the template. This is the project type, this is the template, right? So when a new project was won, Make detected the project type, grabbed the correct link in Airtable and included that in the email to the writer and said, hey, here is the template you need to use. And then these templates, because they were stored local or centrally in Google Drive, we could slowly look at the quality issues that were coming up and change the template. So sometimes we included, it's like the basic formatting of the documents. We fixed that kind of stuff. We also included sometimes very basic training information. So this is the first paragraph. You should put a hook here. You should put, a link to bio here. Right? All these things we had in the template. And for you, especially if you have specific client info that always needs to be included, you can also automatically generate these documents on the fly with placeholder information so that your team has less work to do. So that's how we did it. So here's my question to you. If you have a complex or supposedly complex business problem, if you feel as though your operations, your fulfillment is a little bit slower and potentially less efficient than it needs to be, and you feel like it's limiting your growth potential. So if the idea of 10xing your business scares you, here is a link to book a consultation call with either myself or somebody else on my team, and we will help you make sense of your business, implement some automated solutions, right? Either partial or full automation, so that your business can grow with less work and higher quality and better customer experience. So that is all for today. My name is Ryan, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.